everybody. Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. We are live. This is Salt, and we welcome you to our broadcast that we come right here from our home in amazing downtown Lincoln, Nebraska. Well, not really downtown. I know I say that every week, but I'm still amazed at how we still live here. Anyway, so glad you joined us today. We are monitoring the comments, so if you have anything to say, we'd like to hear it. One thing right now, if you are watching, type in the comments. I'd love to hear. I put a little survey out there. It was if you could enhance one of your five senses into superpower status, what would it be? Would it be, sight, hearing, smell, touch, any of that, to figure out which one you would like. And also, if you have a favorite superhero, Superman, Aquaman. Aquaman doesn't get the love he needs. I mean, he was a minor character, and he's a little, I know, different, but he's a great superhero. But maybe it's Batgirl or Wonder Woman or the Green Lantern. Don't see the movie. And any of the Marvel Universe or DC Comics. Let us know. What's your favorite superhero? And what sense would you put into superpowers? All right, we're going to come back to that later. Right now, we're going to start off with our very first section called Bodacious Soapbox.
Bodacious Soapbox.
So, for today's Brett's Bodacious Soapbox, I'll have a little bit of a story to tell. Mitch Richmond, and unless you're a sports enthusiast, NBA basketball enthusiast, you won't know who he is. But Mitch Richmond was a professional basketball player, and he was actually pretty darn good. He used to average 20 points a game. He was great at rebounds and pretty accurate from the three-point line. And for most of his career, he played in Sacramento for the Sacramento Kings. Unfortunately, during all that time he played, he only made the playoffs once because he was sort of the, lone star on the team. And in the NBA, you usually have two or three good players, and that really carries the team. He was, to some extent, toiling away on his own. He didn't have as much support as like other teams had with Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant and all these guys. But he loved the game. He went out and played and did his best. Interestingly enough, he did get a ring for winning the NBA title one time. And it was toward the end of his career. It was after he was traded to the Lakers. And if you can imagine how many hours are cumulatively totaled in the NBA for every game in the regular season and the postseason, the playoffs, imagine how much time that would be. And in his final season, out of all those hours, he actually played only 11 minutes in the entire season. 11 minutes out of 64 games. What did he do the rest of the time? He sat on the bench. He sat on the bench and did what he could. He supported his teammates. He cheered them on. He dressed up, put on his uniform every game, knowing well he might not get on the floor. He put on his playing shoes every game, knowing full well they probably wouldn't be used. Yet, he did it anyway. Why? Because he wanted to support his team. And he would cheer them on, he would give them advice, and he was there, just doing what he could to support the team. I tell you that story because in the end, that last season that he only played 11 minutes in, they won the NBA title. And because he was part of the team, he got a ring. And some people get, well, he already played at all, he doesn't deserve a ring. It's not just what happens on the court, it's also what he was doing on the sideline. And he was supporting his team in the only way that he could. And in the end, there was this great victory. I wanted to compare that to wearing a mask. It still is amazing to me that some people really don't buy into wearing a mask. And that's just interesting to me, especially Christians, because if ever there was a way to do something that is, even by your own estimation, if you believe, well, this isn't going to do any good, which it actually does, but whatever you believe, you can still use it and put it on just like Mitch did, because it was a way for him to support the team and show he cared about them. Wearing a mask is as much for others as it is for ourselves. And as a Christian, it's one of those ways we can put on and go, I care about you more than my political views, which wearing a mask shouldn't be politics anyway. Me wearing a mask is my statement to the world that I'm a Christian, and because I'm a Christian, I'm going to do this because I am illustrating Jesus' command to love others. And it's that simple. You may or may not believe it does good or does little good or whatever, but when you put it on, you're supporting your team, other children of God. So that's my bodacious soapbox, especially since the numbers are going up and you can see in the news how really we're worse off than when the pandemic first started. So be like Rich, suit up with the mask. And for fun, you can get all kinds of really fun masks and have fun with it. You put messages on them. You can put symbols that would, convey a message. So definitely have fun with it. But wear a mask, suit up, because we're Christians and we care for our brothers and sisters. All right, on to our next section called Story Time. So today's story, I want to talk about space, one of my favorite topics. If you know me at all, you know I love model rocketry. I have since I was a kid, and it is amazing. I love to build rockets. Aspen and I have done some. Check out our YouTube channel. We have launches. We videoed some of the assemblies we put together. Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's kind of cool. If you follow NASA at all, even if you don't, this is really cool. So way back, when Star Trek, the original series, was big and bold, their second movie, because the first one wasn't actually so good, their second movie was about the Wrath of Khan. And it was their big hit, which often makes the first movie forgettable. But one thing that was interesting about the first movie is that they run into, this super powerful, all-powerful satellite being kind of thing. When they get to the heart of it, they find that it was the satellite Voyager that was launched from Earth, during our time. And the whole thing's built around that. And it's kind of cool. Voyager went out and went way, way deep in space and was found by aliens who didn't really know what it was, so they put it back together and made it super powerful and sent it back. Unfortunately for us, it wreaked havoc on its way back home, but still. Anyway, today's story is the true life version of that in some extent. So NASA, major accomplishments in launching rockets. Okay, well, sometimes the rockets didn't go so well. But in the space age, it was really cool because they were trying all this new stuff. They'd never done it before. They were having to invent things, So we need it to do this, but we don't have an invention that works like that. Well, we have to do it. We have to make it. And so they would create these things. And it was really, really kind of cool. And eventually, after they blew up quite a few rockets, they got it right. And the Mercury program, getting them off the ground, the Mercury astronauts, the Gemini rockets, then a little bit bigger, until finally you had the Apollo rockets, which interestingly, we're going back to the Apollo. So when we're planning their trip back to the moon coming up, they're using some of the same stuff from the Apollo launches, some Apollo rockets. And in fact, it looks very similar to a modern day, Saturn V rocket, which is really kind of cool. Anyway, so yeah, they did all that. And there was a lot of power. If you ever watched one, I saw this Challenger. No, not Challenger. It was the Endeavour. One of the shuttles launched in Florida, and I happen to be in Florida. And it's pretty cool to watch. It looks like, man, that's a lot of power, and it is. But we're going to talk about something that wasn't so powerful, that has pretty much an amazing history here. So in addition to rockets, some of the stuff they built afterwards were these satellites or probes, and they would send them out into space. and they each had a specific objective. Sometimes they were sending it to Mars, sometimes they were sending it, out and out the other way. As a matter of fact, you can look at a map and it'll show you the different paths of Voyager 1, Voyager 2, and then the one I'm talking about today, Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11. And if you look at the map, it's interesting. I don't know what's on the backside of our solar system, but they don't ever send anything that way. It must be the boring part of town, I guess, because they all go the other way. There's like north, south, east, but no one goes west. I'm not sure why. But anyway, you can track that and see where they go. But obviously, at the end, they don't bring them back to Earth. They just let them go into space. And you've probably heard in the last, year or so, that one of the Voyagers just crossed into interstellar space. And that's our solar system, and the next solar system, and the space in between is called interstellar space. It's also the name of the movie, Interstellar. Don't see it. Anyway, so Pioneer 10 took off, and it was in 1972. And it was its mission was pretty cool. It was supposed to take off and go around Jupiter, photograph the planet, see the moons of Jupiter. It was always sending data back to Earth. That went to Mars. It went through the whole solar system, right? And at one point, it was 1 billion miles from the sun. That's a lot of miles. I don't think my Subaru will last for 1 billion miles, but we're hoping. 1 billion miles, and it kept going, and it kept going. It passed Saturn, and some 2 billion miles, it went way past Pluto, which is a planet, by the way. Just my vote for that. Pluto's a planet. Don't forget it. And anyway, despite all this immense distance, it was still broadcasting back to Earth. So it went on and on and on, and for a long time, they kind of dropped. It lost contact with Earth. And out of a whim, NASA thought after years and years, I wonder if we can get hold of Pioneer 10. So remember, it was launched in 1972. It had a functional life of 3 years. So in 75, 76, they expected it to be dropped out and never heard from again. January 22, the year 2003, Pioneer 10 made contact with NASA. It was just getting to cross into interstellar space. And it was still going strong. It took up to 9 hours for its transmission to reach Earth, traveling at the speed of light. And they haven't heard from it since 2003, but not because it failed. It simply got blocked by some space dust and this kind of thing. And it very well could make contact again. But it didn't lose contact because it broke down or failed. It was still running when they had their last transmission. Launched in 1972. And it ran on the power of 8 watts. If you don't know how much 8 watts of power is, that's what your night light runs on. That little tiny light that you turn on in the middle of the night so you don't get scared of the monsters. I don't care what Aspen says and tells me. I know there's monsters under my bed. But 8 watts of power from 1972 to 2003, and it kept continuing its mission, just doing what it was made to do with that little bit of power. That is an amazing accomplishment. And right now, I'm going to send it over to Miranda because we talked about it. So give us an AB. And this is on the fly. This wasn't in the script. So I like to do that every now and then. So, Miranda.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes, hello.
We talked about that.
Hello, you're over there.
Oh, hello.
In TV land, you're over there. In real life, you're
I'm
over there.
Here. Oh,
But
and I'm
anyways,
over
okay.
here now. Studio A, Studio B, yay. So anyway, we talked about it, and we thought it was kind of a cool thing. And we're going to relate it to today's talk, I think.
Yes.
And any preliminary thoughts?
Well, today we are just talking about the second parable in Matthew 25, which is the parable of the talents. And as you know, the one servant got 5, one got 2, and one got 1. And I can imagine that little saying that Brett's talking about, would have felt much like the 1 talent servant.
Yes, because it was following the Saturn V rocket, so the Saturn V was the mighty, powerful with all the and the Pioneer was just.
Yeah, but you know what? It did what it was created to do. Much like, if we do what God created us to do, we are the same kind of success. It doesn't quit. God's power does not quit working in our lives when we choose to serve Him.
Yeah.
The way He created us to serve Him, minus the I think that I should be doing this, that, and the other thing. Never mind those little things. It's the little things that God created us to do.
And I like being in education and stuff that, a lot of times I'll hear kids, even adults say, I don't have any talent, I don't have any skill, and my stuff is like so unimportant.
But that's not true at all, because quite honestly, if you are living and breathing here on this earth, you have the gift of time. You have been gifted with time. And how are we choosing to use the time that God has gifted us with? And words. If you are able to speak words, what are you speaking? Kind, thoughtful words to others? Are you speaking gossip? Are you speaking angry words into situations? So there's, if you're like, oh, I don't have a talent, start with what you know that you already have. Those simple things that like I said, if you're living and breathing, you have the gift of time.
Yeah, and time actually is the most valuable thing we own, because once you spend it, you can never give it back.
Yeah, and we cannot create more time for ourselves.
And words too, like in the Bible, it talks about, word being a double-edged sword in the tongue, but words are a gift too. In fact, time and words are probably the biggest, greatest gifts we can give to somebody. So we're going to come back to more of that later, but thank you, Miranda, over in Studio B. And so that's kind of cool. So just for fun, look it up and, take a little history of Pioneer 10. And if you feel like all you have is 8 watts of talent, you can still do amazing things. All right, now today it is time for the ever popular, always good and fun to watch Aspen's Object Lesson.
Today we're going to make art, specifically colorful carnation creations. For today's project, we're going to be making paper flowers. At the end of the video, I'm going to show you a step-by-step on how I made these. But first, a little history on the art of paper flowers. Paper flowers is a thing, a very big thing, and it's been around for a long time. The Chinese were the first to invent paper way back in 100 BC. And as soon as there was paper paper art. Initially, the Chinese used paper to make fans, lanterns, and of course, paper flowers. They put flowers into containers and watched as they floated down the river. It didn't take long for paper to go from China to nearby countries like Vietnam. They used the paper to make lotus flowers, which in fact still decorate sacred altars today. It didn't take long for paper to make its way to India, Germany, France, England, Scotland, Ireland, and all of Europe, and they were all in a paper flower making frenzy. In fact, if you were a woman of certain class in Victorian England, you were almost required to go out and buy a craft kit to make your own paper flowers in your free time. But today, you can find paper craft kits in almost any craft store. You can buy your own supplies to make your own paper flowers, like tissue paper, pipe cleaners, markers, and be part of a long and proud tradition of paper flower making. Paper flowers are also mentioned in the Bible. Okay, maybe not paper flowers, but flowers. In Matthew chapter 6 it says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. What will you eat or drink? Or about your body? What will you wear? Is not life more than food and the body more than clothes? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these." Also, an awesome promise in 1 Peter 1:25 says, "The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of our God lives forever." So go buy a craft kit or find some stuff lying around the house, and remember while you're making the paper flowers, God made the flowers special, and you, and He loves you very much.
Hey, so that was fun. We got to start doing these earlier. We did all that in a day, but at the end, so we cut it before the very end. That's one of her videos that shows you how to do what she did. So it runs through the whole video, but then right after those last end credits, there's her, and here's how I did it. And it'll take you step by step on how you can make your own flowers. So if you're interested in that, it's at the very end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember making paper flowers when I was a kid. Anybody who's at least my age, So I remember it was these big sheets of tissue paper, and they came in multiple bright colors. Aspen used to use white because we happen to have white. But
how did yours come out?
Well, a lot of times they just made it out of bigger pieces of paper, so you had those huge tissue paper flowers.
See, mine not so much.
No?
No. Mine were pretty bad. I never could do this.
See, the problem is you can't mess up a tissue paper flower.
I can. Did it, done it, been there. Yeah, it was really because all my customers were like, hey, and we're making them for our moms, and mine was like this pathetic little. So I'm sure you're way more skilled at it than I was.
Oh, I don't know. Anyways, they seem to turn out nicely and brightly colored. You could pick the bright color,
Yeah,
whatever
everyone's
color
was
you
really
wanted,
beautiful. Yeah.
So
like one girl, and I'm like 7 years old, and there's a girl in and we're all get the one little flower. And I'm sure she's a florist today because she had this 10 rainbow-colored bouquet she made, and the rest of us have our pathetic little flower. But they were actually really pretty, and except for mine. But yeah, they were fun. But we didn't get the great big ones. We only had the little.
I remember sometimes they would use just I think the big or at least really big pieces of tissue paper and make big flowers.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was. But anyway, so if you were to take just one big sheet of tissue paper, it's pretty fragile, isn't it?
I used to rip mine a lot in the wrong way. It was so fragile.
Yeah, it doesn't look like much at all. There's not much to it. And that must have been really what the one talent servant must have thought of his one talent that the master gave him. What am I going to do with this thing? So he buried it. Well, basically, you have to have humility in order to be able to use your one talent. Mm-hmm. So anyways, but take for example, so Aspen would have cut that one big sheet of tissue paper into multiple smaller pieces. Now if you have multiple pieces of tissue paper laying on top of each other, try to rip that. You're just not going to be able to do that.
I actually tried that once, and we got a stack out of a box, and we're supposed to put them in half. You couldn't even cut them. It was hard.
Yeah, because it's so thick, and that's what happens. Every time we use the gifts that God gives us, even if it's just one single layer, multiple layers of thin tissue paper, which appear to be nothing, layered together, have a lot of strength, and that we can compare that to spiritual strength. Every time we use the gifts that God gives us, it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Much like, of course, the servants who used the talents that the master gave them, they became multiplied and became more. The thing about real flowers is they create seeds as they grow, and so apply that to your spiritual life. The flowers will create more seeds. And
we know something about that. Yes, because we don't do anything. Miranda does a garden, like in the front yard and the backyard. And yeah, that's pretty cool. And
Yeah.
when we first got married, she had all these seeds, and I'd never gotten seeds unless they were on the ground. And but you used to get quite a lot of packets of different flower seeds. And,
Yeah. And the beauty of some of those seeds is like this last year I knew we would be moving. I didn't know when we would be moving. And so I didn't plant anything out front or out back. Out back, there was still stuff coming up, the dill that comes up and stuff every year. That stuff multiplies like crazy. And out front, I didn't plant anything, but there were flowers that had reseeded themselves, and it was still a very full garden with the perennials and the annuals that came up on their own.
Yeah. So like if you like to garden, by the way, and you're watching, just type in. We got Aspen watching the comments. Do you have a favorite flower? Do you have a favorite fruit or vegetable you like to grow in your garden? Because you grow a lot of tomatoes.
Yeah, they're so much tastier when you grow them yourself.
Yeah, they really are. Anything pretty much you do by yourself has a much better flavor than what you buy in the grocery store. Just like I couldn't believe how different tomatoes tasted off the vine than they did when you got them in the store. Yeah, it's really good.
Yes, yum yum.
Yeah. Or favorite type of flower we have here in Lincoln. Well, it's sort of two different flower parks. There's the Sunken Gardens over there, but then there's one that's all roses, and all different types of roses.
And I like to go and I stick my nose in every rose,
Yeah.
looking for the fragrance.
Yeah.
And see, that's another thing about flowers. Okay, so you've got those tissue paper layers all laid out on top of each other. We'll compare the hand that comes in and shapes that into a flower, God's hand, because then He shapes the work that we have done for Him. And He shapes that into a beautiful flower. And real flowers, of course, have a beautiful fragrance that gets emitted. And that's what our lives become to Him, is a beautiful fragrance. And like it says in 2 Corinthians 2:15, now He uses us to spread the knowledge of Christ everywhere, like a sweet perfume. Our lives in Christ our lives are a Christ-like fragrance rising up to God. And so...
Yeah, I like that. I think if I was a flower, I'd be... Maybe the sunflower, is that the one that gets really big and round? So I'd be a sunflower, because as I get older, I get bigger and rounder. So I'm a sunflower.
Yeah, I just want to be something sturdy.
Yeah, something sturdy. Yes.
Sturdy that can hold up in the drought and
That's right.
the too much rain and the too much sun and the...
So
you
throw
know.
in a comment. What flower would you be if you were a flower? What would it be and why? That would be
Potentially
interesting to know.
potentially a zinnia.
Zinnias.
They come in lots of pretty colors, and they have grown on me recently because they don't really require a whole lot of care.
Yes.
So that is beautiful about them.
Cool. Yeah, and so that was a lot of fun. But paper flowers are fun to make. Aspen seems to be really good at it, so that's cool.
Yeah, okay.
So today, our topic is...
The Parable of the Talents?
Yay! Well, we're going to talk... That's our main theme. and
Yeah, the
then we're
main
gonna talk
theme.
more.
It kinda-
And if you remember Parable of the Talents, the master gave 5,
Two
2 and 1.
and 1,
5,
yes.
2 and 1. And, the first two invested it and the last one buried it. And in the end, master comes back and says, "Oh, blessed are you for 5 and making it 10, you get more. Blessed are you for 2 making it 4, you get more. What's wrong with you, number 1?" And, he gets cursed and he gets his talent taken away.
Yes. And you had an interesting, fun, personal experience this last week that you want to share with us.
I came
Illustrating.
home and I unloaded my emotional baggage, and she said, "Oh, good, share it with the world."
Yeah, well, actually, I'd gone to bed early because I was tired of waiting
she
up
was
for
already
him.
gone. She was already
I
gone.
was sleeping in the living room chair, and finally I went to bed at 10:15 because, yeah.
It was a late night. I'm helping Tada Theater here in Lincoln do live streaming because with COVID, the live audiences are either greatly reduced or completely eradicated because of the COVID. And so I know the director over there, and I'm going and I'm just helping them live stream their shows. And so we were doing rehearsal this Thursday night, just going through and working out all the kinks. And if you work there, then they give you a little validation so that you don't have to pay for parking. There's a parking garage. And so it was late, and it was getting on, 10:30 or so before, or 11 even before I was going to go home. So I walked to the garage, I get in my car, And if you've been in a parking garage, you know, you pull up to the thing, and it's cold. The Nebraska wind is blowing, and it's cold. And so I got out, and I put my little parking ticket in.
He was probably wearing his Florida coat.
Yes, I was. Actually, I didn't put a coat on because I thought, I'm going to be in the car.
There. But anyways.
Yeah. And so I put the ticket in, and it sticks it back out and says, can't read. I'm like, what do you mean it can't read? You gave it to me. So I stick it back in, and it wouldn't take it. And then I put it in another time, it took it, said put in your credit card validation, and put it in, wouldn't read it, and it stuck back out the validation and the ticket. And it's like, and I could not get out. And this was going on and on and on for like 10 minutes. So finally, I pushed the help button, and somebody came on, and I said, I won't take my ticket, da, da, da. And so, okay, we'll send someone over. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. I realized, like, I'm at a parking garage. I hope no one pulls up behind me. I'm going to be here 30 minutes waiting on a maintenance worker to show up from wherever they're at. And it was really like 3 minutes. And boom, they were there. I mean, I was still thinking, how long is this going to take? And they showed up. And so it was a nice lady. She came out and said, I know the pictures are really small, but you have to put your ticket in this way. It would have been easy for me to go, I'm not an idiot. I did do it the right way. But I said, oh, yeah, okay, I see that. And so she did it, and it didn't take it. She did it, and it didn't take it. She said, oh, something really is wrong. And so she opens the machine, da-da-da-da. And she couldn't fix it right there. Well, she could. She said it's going to take too long, though. She said, this is going to take a long time. So you know what? You don't have to pay for parking. And we have an entrance that is only for the workers, for the staff. And she told me how to get over there, and I went over there. Sure enough, there's a little exit, and I punched, and she said, oh, okay, sorry for, on the speaker. She said, oh, sorry for the inconvenience, here you go. And she opened the gate, and out I went. And that took about 30 minutes to do the whole thing, but they eventually got me out through their entrance that only they knew about.
Yeah, and like you said, he came home and told me the story, the next morning.
The next day, yeah.
And
well, actually, it was later that day, because it was after midnight.
yeah, so anyways, I was like, wow, what a great story. Surely we can use that for this weekend as an illustration. And so anyways, I got to thinking about it. And okay, so there's Brett, and he keeps doing it over and over, how it's supposed to work, how we're used to doing it. And we do that in our lives as well. We keep trying to do what's not working over and over and over again. And so then you've got the woman who comes along and kind of tries to show him how it's supposed to work. Well, maybe this isn't exactly how it works, but the Holy Spirit comes along and shows us why it's not working. He figured out why it's not working. And then she was able to let him out. He got his freedom from the parking lot out through the employee entrance. Well, you know what? We are never going to get our freedom from sin when we keep going back and doing things the same old way that don't work. It is only when we allow the Holy Spirit to work on our hearts and show us that what we're doing isn't working, and then when we serve God, now He shows us the exit to freedom through the employee exit, because we're working for Him.
Yeah, that's true. Because no matter what, that one gate was never going to work. No matter what I did, it was just never going to work. And so then the employee who has the knowledge and the power says, I'll tell you what, there's an exit over there. We'll get you out of that. You need us to do it. Just let us know and we'll let you out. And there it was.
But it would have been pretty silly for Brett to sit there and go, well, never mind. I'm just going to sit here and wait for you to fix it.
I should have done
that. Because I'm supposed to leave through right here.
That would have been an illustration. I just said, I'll just wait.
Yeah.
And they just looked at me like, huh? Well, yeah, I'm going to keep doing this. See if it works.
And that's how silly it is when we keep relying on our pride to tell us how to live.
Yeah. Because then she would have called up the cops and then the insane asylum, and they would have carried me off because this is crazy. But yeah. Eventually I got out. Freedom, and it felt like freedom. I'll tell you, it really did feel like freedom.
Yep. Oh, I would have missed you if you'd gone to the insane asylum.
Thank you.
So,
I think visiting hours are very short. Yes.
Yeah. So, the story of the parable of the talents. It doesn't really say why the guy left town, but I'm going to assume it's maybe a business trip, because you know, he's handing out money to his servants to make more money while he's gone. Sounds like a pretty shrewd guy to be putting his money to use while he's gone, you know. So,
And he's got 3 servants.
yeah, 3 servants. And, you know, we don't know what their gifts were, but, you know, for all we know, maybe, I mean, he gave them money according to their abilities of what they had already proven basically that they could do, who they were, and clearly he knew who his servants were. So, you know, I don't know, I like to imagine maybe what they could do, what they would have done back then. Maybe the first guy was good at training horses, and then maybe he was able to train them to run in races, and either then he could have sold the horse and made money, a profit that way, or maybe he decided to do some chariot racing himself and really come out ahead on his money that way if he won, you know. Or maybe the second guy, maybe he was really good at trading, you know, buying and then reselling something at an increased price because he knew where to go to buy in bulk and such. Or and maybe the third guy was his cook, you know, and we all know how important a good cook is.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
you know, we all appreciate someone who can cook a good meal. And maybe he had a little garden out back. Maybe there was more property he could grow more stuff on. You know, so maybe the master's like, hey, you know, I'll give this guy enough money to buy some more seed. He can till up some more ground and have a little market garden here on the side. You know, we don't know, but clearly everyone has their gift, and he gave them according to what they would be able to do. And God does the same for us. But, you know, we all know the person or people, you know, who have the 5 talents. And when we compare ourselves to that, we're just like, oh, you know, I got this 1 talent, and why do we even bother next to this guy that's like boom, 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 all over the place with all this stuff he can do, and I might as well just, never mind,
Yeah,
not even try doing anything because, you know, it feels like I'm getting a D or an F in life when he's out there getting a million A pluses, you know, so why bother trying? But
and comparing ourselves to other people is a sure way to, you know, kill peace and joy. Just a side road of psychology here. When we're babies and early on in life, we learn about who we are by comparing ourselves to others because we don't have anything else. We don't have a innate birth of self-knowledge. We start comparing ourselves to the environment and these big giant things that are talking weird to me, and they're, you know, we learn their mom and dad, and we actually learn by comparison, and so it sort of gets programmed into us. And when you're young, it's a good thing because it is teaching you about you. But since it gets programmed into us, we tend to carry it on through life in ways that aren't healthy, and we start comparing ourselves to other people, and oh my, they're so this and that, and you know, we give up because we're never going to be as good as them or whatever. And the truth is, you know, at that point where it's an unhealthy thing, we're never really seeing the other person, you know, in their true light. So that's why it's bad to compare ourselves to others, because we're comparing ourselves to probably something that isn't reality, especially on the internet. Very little is reality. So yeah, when we compare, it's not a good thing to do, and we're usually comparing ourselves to something that isn't real.
right, the only thing we should look to be like is God, of course. And so anyways, there's 5 senses. It may seem like we're a little off track here, but we're not.
Nope.
So bear with us. There's 5 senses: sight, hearing, smell, touch, and
Taste.
taste. Yes, can't forget that one. So most of us have most of those, one or all of those senses. And what if we had the ability to increase all of those senses? I mean, we would, right?
Yeah, which one would you supersize? If you saw me over going, what? Aspen has a comment. Somebody commented.
Diane writes, my favorite superhero is Captain America, and eyesight is the sense I would like to supersize.
All right,
Yeah.
Captain America. And we had pictures for all this. I had most pictures for everything else. I forgot to put in, I got pictures of all the superheroes. Captain America, yes. And he was actually the first Avenger, in the Marvel world anyway. And increase your eyesight to superhero size. So very cool.
Yes, that would be nice. I personally would like to currently increase my eyesight because it's getting slightly worse. And I still don't wear glasses. I want to make that announcement. I still don't wear glasses. But I'm relying on Aspen more and more for the fine print until my pride finally just goes away and I cave to actual glasses. But
I do wear glasses.
I don't need them yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do.
Yes.
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 So thanks, Diane. Anybody else watching? Tell us, what superhero would you pick as your favorite, and what of your 5 senses would you choose to supersize, and why?
Yes. Hi, Diane. It is nice to see you since we haven't seen you in person for so long.
Yeah.
But anyways, most of us have multiple of the senses. Take, for example, though, people like who can't see or who can't hear. It's interesting that their other senses become more honed and increased than the average person.
Which would be Daredevil in the Marvel world.
To help make up for the lack of the other.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting in comparing that to the parable of the talents, because while someone may not have all of their senses, their other ones, because they're being used more, increase more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, anyways, if you had the opportunity to only increase one, would you not do it? Just like Diane, you know, if you had the opportunity, only one, which one would it be? Also, you know, I think a lot of times we get more excited about increasing our physical powers, things like that, our senses, rather than thinking about increasing our spiritual powers and our spiritual gifts. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Yes. So all of our senses can be related to spiritual senses?
Yeah, so kind of keep in your head, we're going to talk about senses, which is cool, but what would your sense, you know, of sight, hearing, vision, smell, taste, what would those be like in using them as a spiritual allegory or spiritual symbol?
Yeah, we're just going to keep it pretty simple for the sake of time, but so we can see what God does for us. God does things for us every single day.
Yeah, so imagine the superhero sense of sight. Top of my head, and I had really cool superheroes that we're going to pull up for this, so darn it. Superhero sight. You've got Hawkeye from the Marvel world, and of course Superman, but he gets all of them, so he's kind of a cheat to use. But super sight, we have several superheroes like that. Vision from the Marvel world as well.
Yeah, and we can hear God's voice in more ways than one. Just reading the Bible is certainly hearing God's voice to us.
Oh, we moved past sight?
Sight, yes, but we can go back if you like.
Sight would be being able to supervision sight in the spiritual sense, being able to maybe see God and recognize God's working, where He's working, you know, God's will, movement.
Right, and then taking that to how are we going to use that?
Right.
Are we going to be able to see others' pain and see the things that God wants us to do and recognize it as this is an opportunity to use my time for God and use my ability to see that for
super
God.
Sense of sight being, I can see sometimes what's behind a person, like, you know, sometimes some of the people who look the happiest or the saddest, I mean, spiritual sight would be able to see where people or how people are hurting or in need, and then giving your gift of time.
And can we really hear what they're saying?
Yeah.
And are we going to take the time to say kind words or do something for them because we have heard that? It may seem too small for us to do, and we don't have the time for that, but it's those little small things in life that add up, like those little thin pieces of tissue paper.
And then there's a super sense of hearing, and there is superheroes with the super sense of hearing. Superman again, but he's a cheat. And Daredevil, actually. Daredevil, if you don't know, he is a Marvel character. He was blinded as a child by nuclear waste getting in his eyes. I'm not sure why they keep going to that nuclear something accident and somebody gets superpowers. It really doesn't happen, but that's their storyline. Anyway, he lost his vision, but he got super senses in the others, and so he has this super sense of hearing. And so a spiritual super sense of hearing would be?
Well, just listening to the voice of the Holy Spirit.
Being able to hear God. And you might have people in your life where you've heard them say, yes, God spoke to me, I heard this. Some people you kind of think, wow, they hear from God a lot more than I do. But being able to tune in and hear God's voice, hear God's leading. Certainly in the Bible, there were prophets and kings and different people who had that super sense that was beyond what others did, but they could really hear.
And God created them to be able to do that. They chose to go ahead and use that gift. But that's what He created them to do as prophets and such. And He gives us our gifts to use whatever they may be. And
in the Adventist world, you remember Ellen White was not the first choice of God as prophet for the church. It was actually another guy. What was his name? I'm blanking now because I'm getting old and I wear glasses and contact lenses. I want to say Foster, but that's not it.
I don't remember either right this minute.
Faison Haas. That was it. Haas and Faison. Something like that. Sounds like an ice cream flavor from Ben & Jerry's. But he was chosen first and chose not to take that role.
We have the choice of whether or not we'll use those gifts the way God wants us to.
And he told Ellen White after her calling that it was me, God said something to me, but it had been taken away from him because he chose not to do it.
Okay, for taste, we're invited to taste and see that the Lord is good.
Yeah, and there is a superhero for taste. I found one. I was the one I was ready to give up on. I was like, well, I'll never find. Oh, look. And I don't remember his name. He was a very minor character, but he came from some other planet. But he had the super sense of taste, and I can't remember how he used it, but somehow he was able to use his super taste to fight the bad guys. Not sure how.
Yeah. So are we tasting daily of the sweetness of God, or are His words not so sweet to us?
Because it does says, "Taste, see the Lord is good." So taste can be that getting into the Word of God, and sometimes sweet, and sometimes it's...
Sometimes we don't want to hear it because it's going to cross our path, and we would have to change paths, and we often don't like that. We like our own ideas.
And faith kind of comes in there, because when God shows us something like that, it's, we don't want to hear it, we got to have the faith that whatever God is showing us is better than what we think we should do.
Yeah, like instead of Brett continuing to put that thing in there, finally he gets on the phone and makes a phone call, and recognize that he can't do it on his own.
Yeah.
So then the woman who reached out and touched Jesus' garment was immediately healed. So the
superhero of touch. And there's a lot of superheroes that had that superpower. Again, Superman, but he doesn't count. And who was the touch? I wanted to say it was the Green Lantern. Spider-Man. So Spider-Man had his super sensitive touch power, and he could sense things, and he could climb buildings, and stuff. But his touching sense was greatly enhanced, and he used his super sense of touch to fight the bad guys. Super sense in the spiritual sense of touching is like the woman who did the garments.
She reached out in faith. There's so many places in our own lives where we've been hurt that God longs to reach out and touch us, but are we allowing Him to do that? The Holy Spirit convicts us of the need for that, and yet many times instead we run from that. And the thing is that running from the Holy Spirit never increases our spiritual strength. Go ahead.
And touching, and another application of super spiritual sense of touching is there is some people's ability to provide comfort to other people. It's one where people, and it's not just the super sense of hearing, listening to people, but of touching their lives, touching their heart. Super sense touching can be that gift to be able to help, support, and comfort those who are in pain and in need.
Yeah. And it's the simple little things in life. It doesn't have to have God written all over it. I have a friend who still, after many years of knowing her, she occasionally will send me a card, and it's always so friendly and so newsy. And I love getting those cards from her. It reaches out and it touches me. It touches my heart. And it makes me feel good. And that's a touch that God likes us to do that sort of thing instead of, being angry and withdrawing and such.
Yeah. So maybe you have the super sense of spiritual touch.
Yes, and it doesn't have to be a card that's all about God. And just be, a genuine, friendly, keeping in touch kind of thing. And then we have the sense of smell.
Yes, the super sense of smell. There were several that had that power as well. Daredevil, again, he had the super sense of smell. And he was able to sniff out the bad guys. But one that had the super sense of smell as well that you might not think of was Underdog. Yes, he's a superhero too. And that movie you should see. Underdog, my favorite childhood superhero. And he had the super sense of smell. I guess that makes sense. He was a dog.
Yes.
Yeah.
I even bought you a stuffed
Yes,
underdog.
I have a stuffed underdog. It's so cool. But like a spiritual application of that, a super sense of smell. One way is like you had said earlier. Our lives is a fragrant offering of Christ to everyone around us.
Yeah, that's in Ephesians 5. And then 2 Corinthians 2 as well. It says, Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. And now he uses us to spread the knowledge of Christ everywhere like a sweet perfume. Our lives are a Christ-like fragrance rising up to God.
And it's like the flowers. Like sometimes I'll walk out the front door and you'll smell something and you're getting ready to go somewhere, getting in the car, and what is that? And and all of a sudden you're drawn to it. And it's kind of like that is how I imagine it. Your life is puts on such this fragrant spirit.
Yeah, those little molecules of scent just reach out all over the place. It's funny. This house is really kind of odd. I've never noticed it before like that. But it'll be hours after I'm finished cooking a meal, and the smell has dissipated entirely from the kitchen. And I'll walk back to the bedroom, and it smells like lunch back there. I'll walk up to the front door, and it smells like dinner up there. It's really rather unusual, but.
But that's the same way with the flower. You're going on through life and you smell something. Wait, what is that? And you notice it. When we're living love, that is the fragrance that is, put out because we are, again, that fragrant offering of Jesus' love. And it catches people's attention on their way through life. They're going through whatever, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute. That person must have something because they are so calm in the storm. They're so loving when it doesn't seem like they should be, and that fragrance catches people's attention too and makes them, wow, where's that coming from? And it comes from our relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, so I guess we can ask ourselves if our lives are a beautiful fragrance to God, or if we're just burning through life and it's going up in smoke and not really being particularly useful. And like we bury our talents and life goes up in smoke when we do that. Yep, and so we have covered those.
The five senses, the talents, and the five senses are super talents that can be super skills.
Yeah, so back to using our talents for God's kingdom. Let's divide up our body into 5 separate parts. Legs, arms, torso, head, and heart. Now, which body part would you like to do without?
Right. Obviously, we're moving towards Paul's, explanation of the church as a body. But think of those, different things. So, and this is kind of one of those party game questions too. Is like, well, what would you rather live without, your eyes or your nose? What would you rather live without, your right foot or your left hand? What would you, So pick a part. Which one would you want to do or could do without?
Yeah, I mean, God gives us spiritual gifts that we are to use for the church as well. And so the church as a whole, now you see people with 5 talents, you see people with 2 talents, and you're like, well, what good is my one little talent going to do? But that's like saying, well, which would you rather do without, your head or your heart?
Yeah.
Or maybe your torso. They're all important. It's all
Yes.
important.
Oh, I have a question.
Yes?
What do you call somebody without a body or a nose? Nobody knows. Okay, moving on.
Moving on.
Church silence.
Okay, so a lot of times at churches we see pastors who are gifted, and then the congregation seems to think that the pastor has the ability or the obligation to carry out all the work that needs to be done at the church.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that just because this guy graduated one day from college with a degree in theology, it did not all of a sudden make him immune to the constraints of time. God gave him gifts, but we live in a real world with real time clocks, and one single pastor cannot carry the load of the entire church. And so the problem is when the church then goes under or isn't doing so well, it all becomes a pastor's fault because he's not doing everything. But anyways, that's just my little note to let's if everyone was doing their part and not blaming someone else for it's not being done, we become blessed. Sometimes we don't use our gifts and our talents because we're afraid to use it. I know there was a lady once that came to Brett and she said, I'd like to start a prayer ministry. And Brett's, what do you think? She said, and Brett's like, I think that's a great idea. Why don't you go talk to my wife, Miranda? So she did, and I said, I think that's great. I will be your helper because while I believe that prayer is a really great and wonderful thing, she's the one who felt called to do that ministry. But she said she had felt called to do it for years, but she had been afraid that she couldn't do it. And so that sometimes stops us up. But
and I've always thought so if you're a pastor and you're listening, and if you're part of a church and listening, here's kind of a perspective that I've always said that over the history of our church, I have seen a real perspective of the pastor is the driver of the church. The pastor is the draw of the church. And so if we have amazing speakers, we have this pastor who's a great speaker or whatever, or a lot of, is very charismatic, and that most people, most churches are happy to go to church, do their little thing, but the pastor is the one that drives it. And I've always thought that the pastor is the icing on the cake. The church members themselves are the cake. And you should be able to be a whole cake and taste great without icing. And meaning that a church should be fully functional and running and able to run, without a pastor. Not that you don't need a pastor, don't want a pastor, but you shouldn't be so dependent on a pastor. He should be the one that comes in and throws the icing on. He's the one that comes in and maybe he's a great speaker. He is the one that comes in and provides some ideas and stuff about how to get where the church wants to go. But the church itself, if the leadership and the lay people, everybody functioning, that should be the main part of a church. That should be the main functioning of the church. And so that with or without a pastor, you're able to fully function. Because evangelism, really, especially in today's world, shouldn't be an amazing speaking presentation series of meetings by the pastor. It should be the entire church congregation doing friendship evangelism, inviting friends, and that's where the real evangelism happens. That's where the long-term evangelism happens. When you bring somebody in because of a connection you have with them, that's far stronger than somebody who hears a great message and comes in just because of the message. It happens a lot with evangelistic speakers. They come in, and all these people come into the church because to some extent they are taken by his charisma. He's taken by his skilled presentation. And when that is gone and it wears off, sometimes they just drop out. We know this as pastors. We know if we get 100 people in because of the evangelistic series, we're going to lose a certain percentage because that's what got them in, not the real connection with people. And it's just amazing sometimes when you're looking for a job, like I am currently, the job descriptions you get for pastors, Jesus couldn't do it. And the stuff that they want and expect from a pastor is crazy. And now, I'm not saying all this because it's, I don't have a church. It's not that. This really is my philosophy. If I come into a church and one of the first questions I'm going to ask is, where do you want to go? What is it you see yourself as being in this community? Where do you want to go? I don't want to set your goals. I don't want to set your agenda or your direction. I want you to tell me who you are and where you think you want to go. Then let's work together and pray about it to figure out, is this God's will? And so how can I help this church get there?
Yeah, and basically based on part of what you said, it was the reason that I didn't lead the prayer ministry in the church, because here was a woman who, one, felt called, but two, had been at the church far longer than I had ever been and was going to be there long after we were no longer there. Mm-hmm. If you're going to rely on the pastor's wife to lead that type of ministry, now when you're gone, what's just happened to your prayer ministry?
Yeah.
So it's good for the actual church members to become involved because they're there long term and it is their church and they love their church.
Yeah.
So they can do a better job at that.
And that's the kind of church people are actually drawn to. They look at it and go, wow, these people are together, unified, and they're not just, a spectator sport of church. They're actually actively involved with each other. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So moving on. When I told Brett about the we have the 5 basic senses of smell, he's like, oh yeah, there's also 5 basic senses of, or 5 basic emotions.
Basic emotions, yeah.
And
so all emotions, whatever you think, can be tracked down to or broken down to one of these 5.
Yeah, and I looked on the internet to find out what those were, but when I mentioned to Brett, he's like, where'd you get those from? And I'm like, the internet, the source of all information,
yes.
Right? And he's like, well, how I learned them was glad, mad, sad, bad, and afraid.
Yeah.
Okay. So those basically fit into how the internet said, but they used words that you can remember easier. So I thought, well, all of those emotions fit into the story of the parable of the talents. Mm-hmm. Because first of all, the 2 servants who increased their talents and used the talents that the master gave them, when the master came back, he said, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into my joy. Mm-hmm. Glad. Mm-hmm. Well, it's also interesting to note that out of 5 of those emotions, only one of them is one that you would really like to have, and that's joy and gladness. Mm-hmm. So those who did as the master had told them to do, he said, come and I'll give you joy. But then the slave that did not use his talent his master gave him and instead buried it, first of all, this man sounds like he's mad at his master because he said, you know what, you reap where you do not sow. And so anyways, he said, because of that, I was afraid, and so I went ahead and buried my talent instead of using it. But you know what? The master called him lazy and wicked. He saw right through what the guy was trying to do. You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of some of the students that Brett has in class. Because what they'll do is, I remember one girl in particular. This was a class that was offered once a week. And I think within 4 weeks, she'd missed 3 classes.
Oh, yeah.
All because she had at least 2 parties that she went to, and once she couldn't get out of work or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then after only going to 1 class and missing 3, she shows up to class, and Brett gives him an assignment to be done in class. And then she got mad at Brett because she didn't know how to do. And well, one, of course, they're there is a syllabus, and he sends out emails about what the assignment was and such. So she could have taken a look at the textbook and done what she could on her own, or just gone to see Brett. Between classes, he would have been glad to help her. But no, then she got mad at Brett, which reminds me really of this. Well, the thing is, like, students that do that then, or they wait until the last minute because they haven't been doing their homework because they're gaming or hanging out with friends instead. Then last minute they come to Brett like, oh, what can I do? Because they know that if they don't quick try to do something, there is going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth, which is exactly where the third servant went, who buried his talent.
And I actually put that in my syllabus. I used the weeping when I said, about class attendance, especially for this class, because it only met once a week and it met for 2.5 hours. So missing 3 classes wasn't missing 3 weeks. It was the equivalent of missing about 7 weeks. So it was no wonder, the student was lost. But I do put that in there that, if you miss more than one class, trust me, you will be in utter darkness where there will be weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth. Not knowing we were going to mention that today. But yeah, that's actually in my syllabus.
So anyways, in the end, the master says, cast him into outer darkness. And in that place, there is weeping and gnashing of teeth, which we've already said.
So that third servant, the first thing he did, he was afraid of his master, so he acted out of fear. And then when the master called him out on it, he tried to blame the master. Well, I know you're a hard man, and da-da-da. And so he had this shame. So he went from fear to shame.
Which would be the bad part,
which
feeling
would be
bad.
the bad part, yeah. And it's interesting, he did the same thing Adam and Eve did. When they got caught, the first thing they did was blame each other and God.
Yes, it's true. And they also went and hid when they heard his voice. Much like I'm sure the third servant would have hid if he could have.
Yes.
So, anyways, we cannot bury who God created us to be and expect to have joy. It's just not going to happen. And
your greatest joy is always using your God-given talent, skill, and passion to make the world a better place. When you find that and live in that place, that is the happiest, most joyful you'll ever be. Because you're doing something you love to do, that you're passionate about, and it's making a difference in other people's lives. That is an amazing feeling.
Right. And so we also mentioned about how it's pride that keeps us from using that one small talent, because we kind of think we're bigger and better than that, and we should be doing more. And since it's not happening, I don't know, then we just bury it and we don't bother using it. But pride is a thief that steals who God created us to be, and because it is pride that constantly keeps us seeking after the things that moth and rust can destroy.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to store up our treasures in heaven, which is what the first 2 servants did. They stored up their treasures in heaven, while the other guy just buried it and let it rust, basically. Yep. So, okay, when you read through all of Matthew 25, you have 3 parables. You have the parable of the foolish virgins, wise and foolish virgins. You have then the parable of the talents, and then the parable where God returns and divides the sheep from the goats. And so all of these have a theme, and that is a relationship with Jesus and how that gets lived out. And in the first parable, the wise and foolish virgins need the Holy Spirit. And so here were all these 10 virgins who were getting ready for the wedding party to arrive. And they knew that the party would arrive in the dark, probably, and so they went with their lamps. But in the process of their day, the wise virgins took time to get the extra oil for their lamps. Now the foolish virgins got busy with something else. Other things that seemed important, who knows, maybe they stopped and, spent some extra time on their hair, or spent some extra time finding the perfect shoes that match their dress, those things that are nice to have, but not what is going to be the salvation of our soul. And so by the time they got to the end of their day, they're like, I didn't get the oil, but I'll be fine. I got plenty of oil right here in my lamp, and it's going to last until he shows up. But clearly the wedding party was delayed, and they didn't have enough oil. And so that's what happens to people, basically. The relationship, they choose not to. So anyways, then in the separation of the sheep and goats clearly points out that the wise use of time and living a relationship with God is, and that's just doing the small things in life. He says, enter into the kingdom because you fed me when I was hungry and gave me a drink of water when I was thirsty, and visited me when I was in prison. And the person that did that was like, what? When would we do that? Because those actions don't always have God written all over them. There's those little things in life that we often rush right past, like the foolish virgins didn't stop to take the time to get the oil. Those others, the goats, didn't stop to take the time to think that feeding the hungry, clothing the poor, and visiting those in prison was of importance, because it didn't have God written all over it. It didn't meet their expectations of the grand life that they should be living.
So you may be wondering how this has anything to do with what we talked about previously.
Well, it made sense to me.
Well, when I first read it, I didn't get it. And what it really, I finished when I did it, I read it a second time, I got it. The little things about getting the oil, the little things about feeding and visiting stuff, those are the skills and the talents.
Yes.
And that's the gift of the time and the words.
Yes.
So those two parables tie directly into what we were talking about with the parable of talents. It's doing those things that may seem small but end up being big. Just stopping by, I need to have oil. I need to spend time with God. I need to recognize, what I can do, sharing my time and words with other, and then God will be like, you just comforted me and saying, like, when did I do that? And I said, all these times you did it for these people. Those little things, those are the things that matter. And we, like you were saying, we tend to see on the big things, but it's those little things that we take time that really are the important things. Much like when Jesus and the disciples were going to Jerusalem for the last time. And of course, Peter and the disciples were just all about Jerusalem. We got to go to Jerusalem. Come on, let's go to Jerusalem, because that's, the city of David, and that's where they expected Jesus to proclaim he was king, and da-da-da. And so when Jesus announced that they were going to Jerusalem, they were all excited, and they're, pack up, get everything together. We're going. And they're rolling on, and he's just like, let's press on. And then if you read the story, you'll find Jesus is constantly stopping to help people, which had to be extremely frustrating for Peter, who, has no patience. And yet he was like, oh, that's gonna, I'm going to heal this blind person. I'm going to, forgive these people over here and heal these people over here. And, Jesus was doing those things, instead of going, well, I've got to get to Jerusalem because that's the thing. It was those things he did along the way that was the most important to him versus what the disciples thought were important. That's the sheep and the goats. That's the 10 virgins.
Yes, very good. Thank you.
It took me 2 times through because it was a little deeper than I was just reading. And you got it, and she had it, and I didn't get it the first time. And I was like, oh! And then it hits you, and like,
yeah.
Duh.
Well, it's a good thing I have Brett, because I see it in my head. I fail to say it, and so.
Yeah, and it was like, oh yeah, they'll all tie together.
Never mind.
Yeah.
I'm thankful I have Brett, who does these things for me.
Yeah,
so.
She comes up with it, and I just kind of like, oh, it's like this.
Yeah. So anyways, the question at the end of all of this is not how much have I been given, but what will I do with what I have been given?
Yeah. And it's a question we like to ask, especially in college students. It's like, so what has God given you? What are you going to do with it? How do you want to use it? Yeah. So, and that's kind of like, look at yourself. What 8 watts do you have, Do you maybe you got 5 talents, maybe you got 2 talents, maybe you got 1 talent. And incidentally, that's in Matthew. If you read the story in Luke, it's the same story. In that story, it actually says all 3 servants got the same. So you can't really say, well, I don't have hardly any, talent at all. On the one parable, it doesn't matter if you have just 1. It's powerful. In Luke, it's like, everyone has the same, whether you have 5 skills, 2 skills, 1 skill. Really, its impact and its importance is the same.
It's the same, yes, because which do you want to do without? your head, your heart, your torso, your arms, your legs. Which?
Yeah.
Which do you really want to do without? They're all important.
Yeah. And so it's all seeking a living truth, the simplicity of living, God's truth every day. What skill do you have? What passion do you have? What are you excited about? A good way to answer that is, what do you like to do? And it could be anything. What do you like to do? And then how can I use that to make someone else's life better? How can I use that to, make the world a better place? How can I use that to share God's love with everyone around me?
Right, which is the one important thing.
Yeah. And so I thought that was just really good. They all kind of ended up coming together, and I was pretty jazzed. I was like, yeah, that's how it works.
Well, I figured if they were in one chapter,
They must be.
they must all go together
yeah,
somehow or other.
So. All right, well, hey, thanks for joining us again. And if you're watching us after the fact that we're live, still throw in the comments. We keep kind of going back and checking, and we'll, reply back. We're still not quite sure what's going on with our lives. So we may be here next week.
But the one thing we be sure of is God is in charge,
God is in
and
charge.
He has the plan.
Yes. We just
Yes.
don't know where it's going to take us next.
Right.
But yeah, He has a plan. And our plan will be to broadcast again next Sabbath, unless God takes us somewhere else. We could broadcast from the road, I guess, if we had to. Yeah. So have a great rest of your Sabbath day. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.